Very exciting. That works. Okay, everybody, we're going to get this party started right now. Woo! Thank you for coming. Appreciate it. Means so much. Thank you. Monday. So I am really excited because I have an amazing panel that's joining me today. This is a subject that I've been passionate about for a very, very long time. It took me a long time even to figure out what the words were for it, what it actually meant, right? So I wanted just to tell a quick little story about my journey, and then we're going to jump right into our discussion about this theme for tonight. Because it's important that we understand, why do we want influence? Why is influence important, right? Isn't it just another way of saying manipulating people, right? No. No, it's not. So, real quick, a long time ago, I had to do their annual review. Now, I didn't hire this person. They had gotten hired previously before I had started at the company. And I had to do their annual review, and they walked in and they said, hey, I've been here for a year, and I'm ready to find out what you're going to give me for being here a year. And I said, well, I've got a lot of good feedback from your peers, and here's an increase and all that sort of stuff. And I was like, and that's basically all we're going to do. And they said, well, but I've been here a year, you should move me to a senior role. And I said, well, I don't know what that means. You've been here a year, so you should be a senior. I went down and explained to them, what did it mean to actually be a senior in our organization? A senior is a person who mentors, who helps people, who looks out for problems, does all these things. And that person just turned at me and said, well, I'm not interested in politics. And I said, I literally was speechless. I was like, but that's not politics. I didn't know what to say. Because they technically, I mean, I guess they're not wrong. I mean, who wants to get involved in politics, right? But again, this is about the way that we get our work done. Each of you has to go to work every single day and try to get things done. You don't get things done by yourself. You have to influence others to get things done. It isn't just the people in your team either. It's people across an organization. It's people who have a completely different job than you. You can't get your stuff done without influencing them. And it can't be just because you're in charge, right? You can't a title does not equal leadership. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. And so my distinguished panels, Sarita, Brian, and Kristen, welcome. Thank you. So I wanted to start with my first question to Kristen, because we had a little chat about this at our pregame. Are office politics inherently bad? Is it bad to partake in politics in the office?
Well, I would say the word politics itself has become really a negative word, and I think that may be an outcome of people feeling manipulated as being at the end of bad politics. But when I think about politics as running for office in an actual company, it's really opportunity. So if you've ever worked in a really tiny company where somebody just tells you what to do, they're in charge, and that's that, your opportunity is really small. But when you work in a bigger company and you have the opportunity to lead and influence other people, to see an idea that you have the opportunity to motivate a group of people. And that can be huge, whether it's at a company, in the city, in a country. And so I think that politics is really an opportunity.
I like that.
And not inherently bad. Yeah,
and so, but again, if I want that opportunity, shouldn't just show up if I get my job done, right? Right? Sarita, like if I'm getting my work done, why doesn't it just rain promotions on me?
Raises.
And raises, yeah.
Raises, yeah.
Money.
First of all, I heard that people are going to heckle Brian. Are there people here to heckle Brian?
Very good, very good.
Look at these hands, I love it.
Yeah, I paid a lot for those people, so let's just...
Yeah, I mean, I think people do think like, okay, here's my job description, here it is, here's what I'm here to do. And, business hires you to do that work. But when you really think about the impact that you can have, like, I think it's important to know that influence is really like this sort of aura that you have. It's not just about the work that you can produce, it's about how you help other people help this business, help this culture, help this community. And one of the things that I thought we were going to ask early on, or one of the questions that really stuck in my mind, is this idea that, like, is influence naturally is it inherently manipulative? Is it sort of like knowing what things about people and sort of using what you know against them? And I think influence is actually rooted in good. Influence is intended to be something where you can actually help a business grow, right? And so part of that is knowing the difference between maybe persuasion and influence. So when you persuade somebody, that's typically a very transactional thing. You can use manipulation in persuasion situations, but you can't use it very often. Like, at a certain point, people know that you're manipulating them and they stop. But influence is about, like, cultivating a reputation, cultivating relationships so that people really trust you. They know that you're objective, and that when they come to you, that you're not thinking about just you. Because I think that is the number one influence killer, is when people think that you are only in it for yourself or only in it for your team, then you're never going to have influence. And so it's about figuring out how to make sure that your wake, the sort of impact that you have, is much, much bigger than yourself. Brian, what do you think?
Oh.
Heckle him.
Nice pants, Brian.
Oh, cheers, mate. Cheers. Yes, thank you. I think of influence in terms of that sphere of influence too. So is it that the four of us, and there's this radiant light over our heads, and there's this pool of illumination that kind of surrounds the four of us? We have sort of a nice space in which the four of us can then influence and nudge like actors in a system, and that interplay is going to determine ultimately what happens in that system. I think part of what I heard and what you were sharing is there's that sense too of for the greater purpose, that aim, that North Star that an organization might be shooting for, you can extend that pool of radiance beyond just yourself. And the idea being to not shine more light on oneself, but include more people in it. And you can really sense that when people do that well. And the people I've seen that, influencers that do it extremely well, give me this palpable sense of the ability to amplify what people around them are trying to do, as opposed to diminish, dampen, or elevate one in expense of the other. And that amplification is just really clear. And it's kind of equivalent to that same kind of pool of radiance that they share. And I know that sounds a little touchy-feely, it's not meant to, but it's just one of those metaphor that in my head helps me kind of break that apart from politicking in that negative sense.
Yeah, I think of it as like a ripple effect. Like the radiance is sort of the same concept, or the aura, just sort of like that. It's more than like this being that you are, that it sort of emanates out.
Right.
But it's touchy-feely, for sure, because like transactional manipulation, I was just thinking about this as this panel was upcoming, and I was thinking about sales that are like, buy one, get one free, 25% off, or some type of deal, and that is really a manipulation on you to buy quicker, sooner, or if you have 2 cameras and you've done the research and you're like, oh, you get a free memory card, that's a manipulation on a transactional sales type, and it's not inherently bad. It's maybe like going to not build loyalty for that brand, but it's going to drive their business for that month or that quarter. But on the other side, I was thinking about brands where you really actually sacrifice to like be loyal to that brand. And so I was just thinking about this the other day because I love Patagonia. They have a daycare on site. They close their stores for voting. And this isn't even an advertisement for Patagonia, but like I will drive all the way across town to shop there. I will buy my kids' stuff there, even though I know they'll grow out of it in 2 months. And it's a higher price point, so it's like, oh, what do I sacrifice to buy that because I believe in the brand and I'm loyal to the brand, as opposed to them running a sale. And so they've built this loyalty over time by who they are and what values they have. So it's like, that's inspiring to me. That doesn't make me feel manipulated. It makes me feel like I want to follow them. And then they send me emails about hiking and I want to go on their trip. You know, it's a sense of belonging to a movement or something. So it is really touchy-feely. Yeah.
Yeah, the one thing I think was really powerful for me, when my father used to always say that, people try so hard to be understood before they try to be understanding, right? And The thing that I learned though when I got older is that people kept telling me that I need to be empathetic. Like, well, you need to be empathetic. You need to have empathy. And I'd be like, but I don't like this person. I don't like them. But what I learned is that you don't have to like somebody to be empathetic. You don't. It's a good trick, I'm telling you. You can actually walk a mile in somebody else's shoe and not have to like take the shoes home and care for them and feed them. I don't know, whatever I'm saying right now.
Can I respond? Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think, I've seen this so many times when people think, okay, I'm going to be a great understander. First seek to understand before being understood. But they'll listen with this, they have this inner dialogue in their head, and I know you've all seen it. Like, you'll see people where they're like, well, what do you think about this? And in their head, they're thinking, you're so stupid. How'd you ever get this job? You're incompetent, and they're just like this dialogue. And the problem with that, there's so many problems with that. It's disrespectful to begin with. But when you do that, it leaks. Like, you can think that you're saying the right things and you have composure and you're
not slick.
But you're not, right. But people, they read your nonverbal cues. And if you think someone's stupid, they're going to know that you think they're stupid. And so it's, on top of being disrespectful, it just doesn't work. And so this is something that I work on because I'm a very judgmental person. I've worked very hard on not being judgmental.
Are you an ENTJ?
I am.
Oh my gosh, I knew it. So am I. They're so rare, and I can always spot another ENTJ. I knew it.
That's so funny. Okay.
ENFP.
I don't even know what that means, actually. Okay.
Well, because ENTJ has a really strong J at the end. So when you're taking in information,
I'm a strong J.
Strong J. Yeah, and you have to learn to hone that, right? It's not inherently bad.
Right, because at the same time, my goal is to be kind and loving and compassionate. And, being judgmental and being compassionate, those two things are at odds. And so my rule of thumb, I'm sure this is for many people, is that when you're chatting with somebody, and if you really want to be an active, curious listener, that means listening to the words they say, looking at their nonverbal cues, their body language, the tone of their voice, and then as best as you can, stopping that dialogue. So everything in your head that's like, the soundtrack. For my soundtrack is it's manifest as Phil from Modern Family. Do you guys know Phil from Modern Family? He's constantly talking. He does not shut up. That's the guy for me. So quiet him and just listen. And it's very, very hard to do. But I think that is part of influence, is that sincere ability to not just pretend you're listening or not have people feel like they're heard, that they are actually legitimately heard.
So how do I become sincere when I'm not sincere?
It's hard, yeah.
I'm really struggling because I don't understand what this team does, but I know that if they don't get their job done, I'm kind of screwed, and I need to go over there, but I've got all this work to do. I've got all this stuff. I've got a boss I got to deal with, and now I've got to go and be sincere and have empathy for these folks.
And stop thinking they're stupid.
And stop thinking they're stupid.
Well, as a people leader, right, you're designing the org, and when you design teams that can work together and speak with one another to get and yield the best outcome, you have a motivation and a goal that you're trying to reach, and so you can start to think about it more like a business opportunity to really understand people and be empathetic. So I am one of those people who totally buys into strength finders and understanding people's strengths and their weaknesses, or Belbin, where you figure out, okay, the four of us have different set types and styles, and how can we work together? And I totally buy into it. The whole ENTJ, the Myers-Briggs, where you understand how people take in information and process information, and understanding that's really important. So as somebody who's always worked with a lot of developers and in software, I am an ENTJ, and when I did my Myers-Briggs, it stands for extrovert, and on the extrovert, I was 100, 100. And then I took it again, and it was still 100. And in my undergrad classes, where I first came across Myers-Briggs, and they had us all take the test, and then we each had to go into different parts of the room, depending on what you were, and here I was standing alone as an ENTJ, and the professor was like, brilliant, because that's really what it's like. There's not many of you. And so then kind of getting to know my other classmates and how they took in information. It's like, oh, you're 100% introverted, so me coming at you with all this energy is probably not going to help you do your best. And then when you start to kind of match other people or match people together, take away tasks that are not in somebody's skill set. Like my bottom for strength finders is consistency. So if you give me a job that you ask me to do the same thing every day, I am literally not dumb. I can understand the concept, but it is really hard for me to execute, probably because my brain has filled back there.
I used to run an operations team, and I felt like every day, like your goal in operations is to be like every day is 0.01% better than the day before. And I felt like it was that scene in Office Space where the guy says like, every day is just worse than the day before. You know that scene? Yeah. Yeah, I'm also not consistent.
But yeah, if you take those tasks away from people, they appreciate that because they don't enjoy tasks they're not good at. And nobody enjoys coming to work and not doing their best or not feeling fulfilled or feeling like they can contribute. And so the minute you start taking away those tasks, there's somebody else there that is their strength. And so kind of exercising that has made me be more understanding and empathetic as a people leader, and starting to see results from that.
Well, and Kurt, you had asked, how do you do this? How do you actually show up and be sincere, right?
Yeah.
You have to have just enough dollop of courage to reach down and say, I'm going to choose in this moment to be somewhat vulnerable. As a leader, that's really, really, really scary, right? But opening up that channel of vulnerability taps into your own self-awareness. That, again, radiates. It's that ripple. And it actually gives you enough pause to kind of check that assumption that's kind of rattling around in your head, like that soundtrack in the back. And you might actually hear what someone is saying. So whether or not you're saying, well, I'm going to show up being sincere and all that, attempting instead to show up and being open enough to just be a tiny bit vulnerable, and that could be putting out a gaffe, expressing the thing that you don't know. Showing someone that you're comfortable saying, this isn't a strength, like you were just sharing with us. Those, for me, are practical examples of just expressing and practicing a little bit of vulnerability. And that goes a long way as opposed to instead practicing or putting on the mask of sincerity, which I think is a lot harder task.
I've framed it as generosity. Like that's been the way that has been the thing that's most helped me, is to look at it, this political climate, like, you're either A or you're B. There's not a lot of in between. And so it's very easy to be like, person thinks B, they're an idiot. And so I think it's like finding that thread of humanity. Like, you're human, I'm human, we think very different things. It takes so much practice, but I actually feel like it feels better when you look at it as generosity, because it just feels like, okay, I am doing there's sort of a sense of peace that comes with that. But I will also say meditation and like deep breathing and all of those sorts of things. Because you work with people routinely where you're like part of your brain is like, I think I hate you. And you're like, that's not okay. It's not okay to feel that way. So like find this like shred of like, you're human and I'm human and we have that in common. Okay. And then even when people are saying things, if they're saying like, well, gravity doesn't exist where I am. And you're like, ugh, gravity exists where you are. I promise there's gravity. But
You're talking about sales?
I am actually, yeah.
Yeah, I knew you were. Yeah, well, that's what you get. No, I think that's a really good point. I think the hard thing though is that, everybody's so busy, and to take a moment to think like, I could just run right through these people if I have to, and I will just get the job done. And may the bridges I burn light the way. Let's just go and get all this work done, and then I'll feel good, right? Because I've built up all this stuff. I've got all the work done, right? But the thing that I learned is that it's the legacy you leave, right? That you leave when you leave a job or you move on to other places. So for me, it's about really connecting with those folks, other than it is just the work you get done. It's the work you get done together. I look out in this audience, there's a bunch of people here I've worked with in the past, and it's not about, I forget what projects they were and who it was for and how much money was made or not made, or what exploded, what didn't explode. It probably exploded, but that's not. It's the experience that we've shared, and that's the important thing. But again, like what I see more and more these days is that people are not investing themselves into the other people around them because they might be in a different job or in a different spot.
Well, you could also turn it around and think about it as user experience. So like user experience is about the way somebody feels when they're using your product about themselves. So like if somebody's using your product and they feel frustrated, your user experience is making them feel bad about themselves. And if your user experience makes somebody feel good about themselves, they inherently are more likely to like your product, right? So if you think about yourself as a product and you make people feel good about themselves when they interact with you, you know, your reputation and your legacy and those type of things will go on a lot longer, and you'll find different way, like down the path, you'll be glad you did it that way, right? So taking that extra moment to think about like what that person's user experience is talking to you, like do they feel good about themselves in the interaction, and taking that extra moment sometimes pays, I think, a lot of dividends.
What's a natural force multiplier too?
Yeah.
So Kurt, you were saying, well, why would I, because I'm trying to, you know, at each question and each step here, I'm trying to think practical, practical, practical. So I'm a person that is leading people, there's a team, there's work to be done. It's kind of easy to say, and I got things done, I ticked boxes, I made stuff, I wrote documents. Oftentimes that isn't actually the outcome. The behavior change, the way that you pivot, the way that a group of people start to collaborate more effectively, whatever that is, I always like to look for those force multipliers. Maybe it's me, maybe it's you, maybe it's another element of a process or lack of process or whatever it is, but those opportunities to invest that tiny bit of time to unlock whatever that force multiplier is. Because, I mean, dollars and cents, that's going to pay off. It really is. So if someone's truly thinking in that frame of reference, that would be one of my kind of hopefully persuasive arguments, is to think about it dollars and cents wise. Look for those force multiplier opportunities, and it may require that little bit of investment of your time rather than treasure to find it.
You know, something that was really transformative for me like 20 years ago, I was reading this article, like I was waiting for my sister to try on. She just had a baby and we were like in a maternity place, and she's trying on nursing bras, and so I'm like waiting for her, and there's a Harvard Business Review. It's the first time I'd ever picked up a Harvard Business Review. It was like such an odd series of events. And there was this article about jerks and lovable idiots. And, you know, it's classic HBR style. It was a quadrant. And the idea was like on the scale of likability. So there's like jerks on one end and then like super likable people on the other end. And then the other axis was really incompetent and like, you know, incredibly most brilliant person you've ever met, right? And so the top right quadrant is the superstar. You know, everybody wants to work with a superstar. And the bottom left quadrant was the incompetent idiot, mean, incompetent idiot. Nobody wants to work with that person. But the thing that was interesting was that the lovable, incompetent person, the guy that you liked being with, was more sought after than the brilliant jerk. And I mean, it actually, like, this whole thing was that competency is actually second to likability. And so likability isn't just like, can you get a beer with this guy? Like, I mean, it really does mean that your character has to be something that really stands strong, that people trust you and all of those sorts of things. But I thought that transformed how I interacted with people. Not that I was an idiot jerk before that, but I felt like, I was like, oh, yes, there is value to just, you know, finding the humanity in the people around you.
So Sarita, can you point to something that you actually consciously chose to do differently because of that new perspective?
Yeah, all the time. I mean, I really do routinely, like if I'm going to have a conversation with someone that I know is going to be a difficult conversation, someone that I actually really, truly believe I dislike, like I do, I like do box breathing. I don't know if you guys know box breathing. It's like breathing in 4, holding your breath. Like I do all of these sort of like techniques to really just be conscious and present, because I need it. Because if I fall into my old patterns, I am very judgmental, and I will think that, you know, I really will think like I really don't like you. I don't have any interest in making you successful. You know, I have those sorts of thoughts, so I have to be really conscious. I say all of this because, I mean, it makes me sound like I struggle to do these things. I mean, at this point, it's relatively natural, but it is easy. Like if you're a sharp person and you do well and you are used to people kind of just doing what you say, you have these expectations, right? And that doesn't work. I mean, that doesn't scale as a leader. It doesn't build loyalty with your colleagues. You don't feel good about yourself when you do those things. So, the standard that you hold yourself to has to be one where every day you look in the mirror and you feel like, okay, you know what, I really walk the walk and I talk the talk and I feel like as best as I can, I do the things that I intend to do. It takes a lot of work. And I mean, it really is like physical tactics, like breathing and meditation and removing yourself when you need to remove yourself, all of those things.
So one thing that I started doing 6 years ago when I became a mother was when I would talk to somebody, it was too hard for me not to think about like them having a parent or like this is somebody's child, and it kind of made me feel like I want someone to be kind to my child down the road and to be patient with him and guide him to his next experience. So yeah, that had a lot of impact on me, and it really makes me think about how I treat people because they belong to somebody else, family or friends. And then the other thing is when you have to let somebody go, that is something that I never want to do. So I take really careful care in hiring because it's very important for like setting people up for success. But if you inherit somebody that you wouldn't have hired, and even when they're a total jerk, like I inherited this guy once, and he said to me in our first one-on-one, he was like, "Oh yeah, I don't do any work actually," and I was, "I'm sorry, what?" And then he looked at me like, "Oh shit, like I mean I do work," and I was like, "Oh yeah, I got a list of things for you to do." Yeah, and so, but still, even as much as I didn't like that guy, I had to let him go eventually, and it was unpleasant, and I still went home and felt really terrible because I just think about that person being a human being and going home and having lost their job, and so that's what kind of breeds a lot of empathy for me is thinking about the human connections that they have outside of our experience right here.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the thing that I learned. I mean, when I was much younger and had my first job, like kind of leading a team, I wanted everybody to be my friend. I thought that was gonna be great. We're gonna have this great experience, and we're all gonna be friends, and we're gonna go have beers and be friends, and we're gonna work on stuff and be friends. And then it all like dismantled, right? And I was like, what's going on? I thought we were friends. Like, why did you finish your stuff? Because we're friends. Like, you know what I mean? It just, it's because, yeah, we're friends. Like, why do I have to finish my stuff?
See, it's like the guy who didn't do work.
Yeah.
The person before me he reported to, they had an agreement.
Oh, they had agreement.
Agreement that he
Because
just
they were
didn't have to
friends.
work because they were friends.
Because they were friends, right? That's pretty great.
You should see the things I found in his desk after he left.
I don't.
He had like a mirror up to see if people were.
We're just coming, just you can shut off his video game, close the tab or something. That's great. Yeah, no, I mean, but yeah, well, I don't want to even. Okay, so the thing is that what I found though is that in order for people to feel like they actually got value at work, there was some discipline and there was some constraints. They needed to know what good looked like, but they also needed to know what not good looked like. And I think that it's a difficult conversation because you don't want to go in and be like, and this is what it takes for you to like not be here anymore. And you don't want to have that conversation, right? And you especially don't want to have it nice and early when they're new there and you want them to still be excited about working with you, right? But I think that's the important time to actually have those conversations.
Yeah, and when you have those conversations, you can still have empathy. Like I've let several people have, like I've had to have those conversations either in this isn't working, here are the steps to get to where it's going to work. And I actually am really surprised. I've had a lot of people thank me afterwards, like, wow, I was kind of not inspired and now I see the things that I need to do. And I've seen people like turn it around and I'm like, oh, I actually like you. Back from, wow, why are you not working?
Yeah, no, I think again, going back to what you were saying, Sarita, as being conscious and present. Because it's really easy when you start to get into an uncomfortable situation, or it feels like it could be uncomfortable, to just start shutting down parts of you, right? And be thinking about what are you going to do later, and what did you know, oh, I shouldn't have had a burger, like, right? Like,
You fall into old patterns.
yeah, right? And so I think that's super important, that you have to practice being present, because it's really easy to just shut down and just go through the motions, right? Oh, okay, well, you're, in charge of this area that I don't get along with, and I got to have this conversation with you, and so I'm only going to put my foot in the door and talk to you and then leave, right? And I can just tell everybody, yeah, I talked to them, right? And then nothing got done.
That stuff kept me awake at night more times than I care to admit. I think the tonic I finally found to get my head out of that was considering the individual versus the village. So if I was going to have one of those, air quotes, hard conversations with somebody, you're kind of building up all this almost like emotional armor, and you're ready for battle. And then I kind of reminded myself a couple key things. One, it's not about me. That helps a lot. That's something I have to practice every single day. It's not about me. And then also realize that I'm probably doing a disservice to the individual not to have the conversation. And then I'm also potentially doing a disservice to the village that they're a part of, be it org, team, group, work stream, whatever it is, that depend on those interrelationships working. And this is a function that is not congruent with the people in their work being effective. And so there's this extra opportunity to then depersonalize it in a sense that it's like, well, it's not about me. It might not even be about her. It might be about this greater village I'm trying to serve in near term and longer term by having this conversation. And that just helped me structure, I think, like you said, how do you get to green? What's that path forward? That set of lenses really helped me even think what a path forward might look like. So.
Yeah, and even the group politics, a lot of times if it's one group that doesn't like another group, it's easy to be in your team or your group and you disband from a meeting, or it's like, oh, we have to work with them. This is going to be so difficult. It's always so difficult. There's a huge opportunity in that to reach out to one person, someone on that team, and have coffee or get together and figure out what their pain points are. Because a lot of times in any relationship, if you say, hey, look, I'm really sorry, here's where I messed up, the other person is far more likely to say, actually, it's not all you. Here's where I did this, that, and the other thing. And I think that's a really effective technique that's taken a lot of years of practice, but I use it a lot in my marriage too. And it really works. It's like the minute I apologize, my partner apologizes back to me, and then we're having a constructive conversation, and I think that's what's made a relationship that I really enjoy being in, because I know that we are respectful to each other, and I think that can be built over teams too. And that usually just starts with one conversation and say, we're always late with our stuff, and it's kind of downstream. This is what happens, and this is the chain effect, and so we're going to work on this part. Do you think you could work on this part with us? It's like, how do we become one team that's trying to get to one goal as opposed to us and them? The us and them is always a bad recipe for disaster for what people, I think, call politics that are gives it a bad connotation.
Thanks for that. I think that's a really nice concrete example of how to stand in inquiry as a practice. Meaning, rather than disagreement, you're inviting shared exploration. And that's just a great way to diffuse that sort of combative stance. Or like you were saying earlier, it's so human to be judgy. It's so easy to be judgy. Taking that moment to turn that into self-reflection instead. I had a friend, dear friend, we were at a bar, we were listening to some jazz musician, shoes off, bare feet, tapping on the carpet, banging away on this keyboard. In my mind, it was just so not engaging. And I started to get really bristly, and my hackles are going up, and I'm watching all these 20-somethings getting into it, and I'm like, what is this? Come on, get out of here with this shit. What are you talking about? And I really started to bristle at this, and Dan goes, Brian, it says a lot more about you than it says about this cat, how you're reacting. And I'm like, oh, thank you for taking me out of my head and reminding me of that. And so I think of that night all the time when I'm trying to remind myself to do those things, to diffuse and create shared exploration that way.
It's hard. It's like yoga and meditation. It's a practice. You don't just achieve it and then you're there. You have to it's an ongoing,
It's like no one wakes up and says, "Oh, I've achieved Zen. I tried Zen, and now I'm the Buddha." Yeah, it doesn't happen like that. It is years and years of work.
Yeah. What about the other side though? Is that I've had other either peers or leaders or other people say, "Well, just treat them like adults," and then like that's the answer. Is like treat them like adults.
Like adults.
Yeah.
Like people over 18?
Yeah, people over 18. That's what I assume that they mean when they say. I don't really understand what that means. Because again, like, there's a difference between, I feel like being able to be present and having those difficult conversations with people is treating people like adults, not just saying, do what you're gonna do, and if you do step on something bad, then I'll scream and yell at you, because that's what adults do, right? It's like everything's fine until it's not, and now the house is on fire and we're all running into the street, right?
But I just assume that when people have said, treat so-and-so like an adult, I interpret that to remind myself there's a respect that that this person is due. That maybe if I remain open to surprise, like this person could literally surprise me, I might surprise myself, they might actually do something in reaction to a plan or a way forward. They might actually do something if you bother to take a moment to be present and actively listen, like you were saying. And if I shut down that sense of surprise, then I'm not giving them even that modicum of respect that I think that they're owed, at least, to have that chance. And so that's where I think if I'm diminishing someone and making them childlike, I'm just pre-assuming that they're just never going to be able to do this.
But also, if someone shows you who they are, like, you should believe them.
Right, right.
I mean, if somebody truly acts like a child, like, are you really supposed to keep treating them like an adult?
I don't know.
I think if you pay their salary, yeah.
Oh,
I mean,
yes,
I
that.
feel like, if they're your employee, when I've heard don't treat people like adults, I've thought typically that's like don't coddle them, don't overly nurture people, let them sort of explore. But at the same time, I mean, these are all, like, we could spend a year on like sort of leadership development and influence and all those sorts of things. I mean, these are things that are skills that you develop, and you only develop really through exposure and practice and mistakes. But definitely, like, in terms of feedback, I know you don't like the term feedback, but I always think of feedback as a gift. Like, so if you see that someone's really struggling with something, or if they're not meeting your expectations, that's a form of influence. Like, how much they listen to you and how much they understand you. And a lot of that is really situational. It's understanding, like, who is it that you're talking to and what words are important to them. Do they think in metaphors? Do they think in examples or whatever? And I also always think that, like, it's always important to be kind too, because, like, sometimes people feel like when they give feedback, they're like, okay, you really suck at this. Well, that's not effective feedback. Like, people can't do anything with that. It just makes them feel badly. And so, you don't want to be, there's a fine line between being sort of mean and giving constructive feedback. And so those are just things that you're, like, I will say, like, just through, like, mistakes and practice that you just learn from sort of doing. I don't know that there's necessarily, maybe it's the golden rule, like, how would you want someone to give you this kind of feedback? If you were in this situation, what would you want? I would actually say, just generally in terms of influence, I would say always, if you're trying to, as you're building relationships with people, first stand in their shoes, and this goes back to understand them first. But that is, like, maybe rule number one, is to think, like, stand in this person's shoes. What's important to them? What does the world look like to them? What is their worldview? What do you know about them? Because that helps you interpret why are the things that are important to them, and and then you can ask yourself, why are the things that are important to me? And then you get into the situation where you can find common ground, and you're like, you like motherhood, I like motherhood, we have that in common. You like apple pie, I like apple pie, we have that in common. Like, you find some sort of common ground and build from there. But back to this point about, like, storming in a room and being like, it's gonna be X, everybody be creative, go design, go be innovative, like, that is, I don't know that that's ever worked. Yeah.
Hi. Yeah, the one thing that I've learned is that there isn't just two speeds to leadership. There's the way that people people that I've talked to over and over again, they think of it like there's either superiority or there's inferiority. There's the only two speeds I have at work, right? I'm either in a position where I have some sort of power and influence, or I'm not in that position. And the way that I learned to broach that over time was I kind of just, I mean, I've heard this before, but I kind of made up the word. It's like interiority, where it's all about just, we're all on the same playing field. I don't care what your title is. I don't care if you're below me, above me, we're next to me, sideways, whichever. But I will never look at you as your title or your position, but as somebody I can learn something from. And if I can learn something from you, and I can also provide some sort of learning back to you, it places us both in this place of learning where we're actually getting somewhere. Now we're actually engaged and we're feeling like we are part of something, that we're here to actually have some sort of impact, right?
We're Americans. Americans are egalitarian by nature. I'm always surprised when people level themselves down.
Yeah.
Like when you go into a room and you maybe think, oh, this person's so amazing, you put them on a pedestal. If you put someone on a pedestal, you put yourself down. So again, it's really hard, but just use that American mindset. No one is better than anybody else in this country. So remind yourself, if you go in and you're chatting with the CEO and he's whatever number of levels above you, you are human and you're worth something, and they are paying your salary. There's a reason that you're here. Always remind yourself of that. This person may be impressive and they may be amazing at all these things. So are you. You're amazing at a bunch of stuff. So remind yourself, don't level, I would say, I have 100 different rules, but don't level yourself down. Walk into the room and, I will not make any America jokes right now because it's too fragile. But remind yourself that, we are a democracy.
Yeah. Woo. I like it. Yeah, I think that's really powerful what you just said, because if we're constantly trying to find where our position is instead of just determining who we are and what our position is, and don't get me wrong, just like you're saying, that takes work. People always ask me sometimes, they're like, what's the first step at becoming a good leader? And I'm like, well, it's the same if you want to lose weight. You start hitting the gym. It takes time. It's not something that you can just switch on or switch off. And to your point, Sarita, one of the greatest things I've learned over this past year of doing this show and talking with leaders and talking with other people is don't trust success.
That's right.
Just don't. People do that all the time. They're like, oh, this person is at this thing and they were in the newspaper and they have this and that. And so you assume they have their shit together, right? But they don't. They don't. They really don't.
You don't know. I had, when I was pregnant with my third child, I was at United Health Group, which some people here are from United Health Group. And there's this woman, I'll call her Roseanne. That's not her real name. Roseanne Jolenberg. And I was pregnant with my third child. I was 10 months pregnant. I was like a sphere. Imagine a grapefruit with toothpicks for arms and legs. So I'm waddling down the hallway. And I'm getting to some meeting or something, and Roseanne, I'll call her Roxanne. Roxanne walks around the corner and she's in a pencil skirt, and I'm sure there was a wind machine blowing on her. She had this platinum blonde hair and stilettos, and I was wearing olive green Mary Jane Lands End tennis shoes. And what I did not realize was that my shirt didn't cover my belly, so I was exposed. The whole thing. And so I'm waddling, and she whips around. And she's just been promoted to vice president. She's not even 32 or something like that. And we were actually, just as a side note, the exact same age, exact same birthday, same year, everything. And I remember chatting with her, and she was like, well, I'm vice president. But I also learned that, this sounds so bad now that I say this out loud.
Please do continue.
No, don't worry, we're not recording this.
Okay. In that grapefruit metaphor, I had a grape for a head. I actually do have a picture in my head. Anyway, she had recently been separated from her husband. She didn't have any children. And I was having my third children, and I had actually been, my boss at the time had asked me to take a promotion, and I actually asked to step down and went down to part-time, or was going to go down to part-time after my third baby. And so in those situations, when you judge somebody and you're like, oh, this person has achieved so much at a certain age, you don't know the backstory. And in her case, she told me the backstory. And of course, like if you were to ask me, would you take a happy marriage and 3 healthy children over a title? Who wouldn't say, of course, that's a no-brainer, right? But so like what you see is just that little thing that you see. And it's not a representation of anything else. And don't make assumptions. Again, back to, this is American, we're egalitarians. Like, that person excelled at that one thing. That's all you know.
That's good. Okay, so we're going to open it up for questions. We want to make it a little bit more about everybody. But first, because I did such a piss poor job of introducing folks, I just wanted to give you a moment to just say who you are and where you're from. Or where are you doing? Just go ahead.
I'm Sarita Parikh. I don't know if you know this, I have 3 children.
Surprise.
Yeah. I work with Pearson Education, and I work in a division that's focused on helping adults who didn't finish high school earn their high school diplomas. It's a business where we have a mission. If our mission does well, our business does well. So I feel very, very grateful to do that kind of work.
I'm Brian Rowe. I'm currently a consumer experience architect at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Minnesota. You can ask me later what that means because I still don't know. I have had the career path that I would never, ever, ever advocate anyone else do, which is curvilinear. It doesn't go anywhere. It probes into every dark, pointless corner of IT to jazz to, stupid stuff. So I will say though, and these pants exactly. But I will say this, if I can give any cred to myself, it's that I turned a theater major as my undergraduate, and I've parlayed that time and time and time and time again into business value for people. And so I will never tell theater majors that because they'll just never believe me. But if that gives you any kind of frame of reference.
I'm Kristen Womack, and I've lived here for about 13 years, so I'm a transplant to Minnesota. And I run a company called Hack the Gap. You might have heard of it. It's an all-women hackathon. I'm also building another company called Hello Mom, which is a video platform for connecting lactation professionals with new families. And on the side, to keep all that going, I also do software consulting in product management, APIs, strategy, and if you asked me to build your website, I'd probably do that. So Yeah, and I also wanted to say I went to school for sign language interpreting, and I still feel like it brings value today in product management technology and leadership business. And so theater major, I had to take a theater class too. Almost switched majors then. So yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. I will just edit this at the beginning of the show so it sounds normal. And you guys will all play along. Right? Okay. Questions. Let's open it up for some questions. Yes, sir. Hi, Darren.
Hi. Okay, so...
Everybody, just real quick, I wanted to introduce one of our new employees at Foundry. This is Darren. He just joined. Say hi, Darren. Go ahead. A little embarrassing. I apologize. Just excited.
So, my question is not in relation to the position I will hold, but one that I have now. How would you recommend someone who is in a new position that is the only position within a team, and they want to create influence, they want to sort of build a culture around these new processes in relation to that position? How would you recommend that person go about doing that?
Can you say more, like when you talk about building culture, say more about that?
So let's just say this is not me. This is just for the...
Hypothetically.
This is for a friend?
Yes, for a friend.
I have a friend.
Asking for a friend. We're probably going to get a few of those today. Just brace yourself.
So this is someone who is hired as a designer for a team, a digital team that's consisting mostly developers, project managers, product managers, and the designer is, there is some level of value added to that position, otherwise it wouldn't exist. But it's the only position on the entire team, and so the majority of people on that team sort of view this position as kind of more of like a task fulfiller rather been an actual true resource that can help from beginning to end. So how would that person that's on an island with all these other people that have their processes figured out, how would they make their value known to everyone else who has, up until this point, never worked with an ambitious leader?
Okay, so we were all like, who's going to take this? For your friend, what you're describing is exactly my January through July of this year. So I was brought onto a team that did not have experience design, period. The mandate included change culture. That's a tall order, and I don't claim to have been successful yet at doing that, but hopefully in the spirit of your question, what I did do is, first of all, maybe most importantly, really dive deep into my well of curiosity. And that could be, if you're an extroverted person like I happen to be, meet and greets. And not just, hey, Sarita, it's very nice to meet you. I love to learn more about what you do here and all that kind of good stuff. But then at the end of that conversation, obviously being very appreciative, genuinely, sincerely appreciative for their time and their contributions and insights. But then, so who else do I need to know? Who else should I meet? Because hopefully you would have gotten in this time a little sense of who I am too, and that might trigger a spark to say, oh, you need to meet Kristen, because actually she's super cool and cares about parlaying a certain kind of dynamic into value too, and you might have a lot to talk about. So that's kind of one track, is the meet and greet, get to know people, deploy radical curiosity. In the sense that you're sensitive to people's time and whatnot, right? But then the other thing too is what I found, rather than getting up on my pulpit and saying, here's what consumer experience means to y'all, unwashed masses, hell no. Instead, finding those moments where you're doing real, demonstrable, meaningful work together, taking a moment to understand how they approach it, and then realizing, and I think you mentioned this, part of the value of why I'm here is because I'm not of this team. I am from the outside. I have seen things that people haven't been exposed to for quite a while. It's part of the immigration by design that happened to me being a part of the team. So I'm just going to slip in this one little exercise, or this one little method, or this one little, hey, let's just start sketching something, because 40 minutes later, I kid you not, people got their heads out of the PowerPoint, out of the spreadsheet, they were writing and drawing, and they were taking that activity and promoting it and doing it and starting to express things in a different way. And that was just one little tiny touch point, 40 minutes. And that's what I would advocate, is just that radical curiosity, really care to know about other people, get introduced to others in turn, and then also find those moments where that design practice, that method, that's something a little bit different that helps people reframe what they've been staring at for a long time. If you can find that organic and unthreatening way to introduce that into the stream of their natural work, man, you'll just see stuff take off. I promise.
Yeah, the one thing I would add for people on the other side of that, where they're bringing somebody like your friend into this
Are you
team.
asking for a friend?
No, I'm not asking for a friend. I mean, well, maybe no. But if you're bringing in a resource to a team for a certain job, I think as a leader, as a project manager, a product owner, whoever you are that's bringing these people together, you need to explain to the other team what their purpose is, other than just they're a designer, right? Like, what are your hopes, the impact that they have, all those other things. So on the opposite end, there's obviously all the benefits that, as Brian Sarita kind of pointed out, about you kind of doing your own roadshow, right? And then learning from people. But I think it's also important for us that are people that bring together people as teams to make sure that we're taking the time to explain what the impact is we're above their title or their job.
Yeah, Kurt, but what happens when the person in the company didn't bother to do their homework and get their ducks in a row before you showed up?
And you quit and you just walk out. You just, yeah.
I find that it helps when you overturn tables.
You
on your
overturn
way out,
flip
too.
tables. Yeah. Well, I think part of that is just making sure that you're being as astute as you can be. I mean, just because maybe that person isn't, if you're one of those people on those teams, you could look over and say, I can also be talking to you and finding out what you do and how you do it, right? Because I've seen a lot of people that have maybe left like like a company and then got promoted at another company, right? And then when they show up in that other company, they're like, I'm a leader, but I'm new, and what do I do? And my first piece of advice has always been, go and start asking a lot of questions. Go and interview everybody. What do you do? How do you do it here? What do you do? And talk about yourself as little as possible.
Yeah. And very practically, one thing that I did, like a tactic I used is, ostensibly I was supposed to kind of educate what consumer experience is. I don't know what consumer experience is, just for the record, it's on tape. But what I did do instead is I invited people to express what they thought it was in their words. And surprisingly, again, there's that being open to surprise. People were really on the mark with a lot of it. And all you needed to do was validate and kind of appreciate that, or just add a little tidbit to it to just give it a little bit more flavor and zest. But it was really surprising, just not even bothering to pretend that I'm going to educate anyone anything, but really start to try to draw out and kind of help them illuminate what they already know.
Yeah. Cool.
I once had a job interview, and everything sounded fantastic. It sort of just like went to the next level of what I was already doing, and I just saw, as they described the problems and the goals that they had, it was like, I'm your person. I can do this. I was so excited. I thought for sure I had all the answers. I did. I had all the answers. And when I got there, what I didn't realize and what I only learned through a lot of hard lessons is that there were a lot of cultural things going on that I didn't really understand, and I didn't take the time to understand the whole landscape and exactly what my challenges were. So, I'm not really a big sports metaphor person, but if I were to make a sports metaphor, it's like before I went up to bat, I didn't really do my homework about who was playing the field.
Homework in baseball.
And
I don't think that
well, I didn't really understand what the challenges were. And had I might have realized challenge 1, 2, and 3 is actually not winnable no matter what I do. And sometimes when you go to play, you need to assess first if it's winnable or not, because we only really have so many jobs we're going to do, or so much time on this earth, and we want to make the biggest impact. Everybody wants to do a good job, and so it's if you're going to go up against something that's not really winnable, that doesn't help you to, contribute in the way that you really want to, deep down in your heart. And so if it's not winnable, it's okay to say that and walk away. So I think first is do your homework on the culture side and figure out what's going on here, and do my ideas and my idea about what I think is going to work to start this new practice or this new role. Is that really just a projection of what I think, or am I really assessing it for where I match up with what they need? And then my second piece of advice would be to also introduce things that are not your ideas. So published research, things that people are doing, because a lot of times people feel threatened when someone comes in and they're new and they're like, I did this on this team, I did this, I'm so great, I'm wonderful. And you think that you're really just offering some past things, but it doesn't always come across like that. Sometimes it comes across as you know everything. But if you bring in oh, I just saw this study the other day, I thought of you, and then give it to that person in a way that maybe they can share it, and then they feel proud that they've shared that, and then it's more of a bonding experience as opposed to you just being a know-it-all.
Yeah, or just illuminating for people when they have already done the thing.
Exactly.
And you build on that and kind of celebrate that.
Yeah, and then when you're presenting something that's a new idea, building it off the next person, and really saying, I wouldn't be able to do this without this foundation here. That really is, I think, building and relationship building.
Do we get to the heart of your question, sir?
His friend's question.
It's good. Okay, we're only going to take 20 minutes per question. That's so just here. Hi, Amir. Hi, what do you got for us? Good to see you. Monday. Here we are.
So, my interpretation of everything you've been talking about, or you've been talking about tonight, is that we all have a lot of insecurities, and we built up these egos to mask those insecurities, ancient tribes that would wear these masks during the rituals. And you've talked about a lot of ways we can drop those masks and be real people with each other as teams within our companies, but I know for a fact, and I assume at least half of us in this room are in service-based industries. So oftentimes we have to keep those tribal masks up because we're representing a company to a partner or a relationship we're building with a client. But these relationships these days are becoming so complex and so long term that they really are becoming team members. So how do you do that with those barriers still in place?
Good question. Want me to start?
So for me, I've been doing, whether I am inside I've worked for big companies, small companies, startups from the ground up, all different sizes companies, service-based consulting, and for me, what resonates is I really come from a place of servitude type of leadership, and I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with that concept, but really not really just barking orders, but really like serving your customer and serving your employees in a way that is more or less clearing the roadblocks to everyone's success. Like, how do you really make things possible for people? How do you grease the skids? How do you become something that can make everyone move faster? And with clients, I just have to keep being that authentic, like I have to bring that forward. And I think a lot of that comes with being humble and sort of letting that guard down with clients. And it's a leap of faith, but I don't try to pretend that I'm not somebody who I am. So I think it's kind of refreshing. And I've also come to the place in my career where I almost feel like if it's not a fit, it's not a fit. And I'm not afraid to let that be somebody else's client. Because I want to be happy in all the work that I do. So if I can't really be doing the work I want to do, it's happiness first and everything else sort of next. And then in serving clients that I work with, I found actually that when I tell them about failures or that road, I'll say like, I know how to do this because I failed 3 times and then I was successful at it. And I think people appreciate that from my experience. So maybe that's a non-answer, but.
Well, you're saying work for yourself then.
I guess what's the, I mean, I'm not sure that I understand the question. So when you say that you feel like you have this mask, like you have your real you, and then you have this mask that you're expected to carry on behalf of the organization you work for?
I think it's a lot easier to let go of the barriers you build up in an internal team than it would be with a client. But these days, at least in the business that I'm in, and I think a lot of people are here, it's hard to let go of those barriers. It's hard to drop those because there's a certain there's a company you're represented with, right? So there's a certain sense of professionalism that you have to maintain that doesn't allow you to drop all those masks. Mm-hmm. So how do you deal with the relationship with a partner, with a client, in the same way that you would with a team member?
Well, just to add on a little bit, I think when you work for yourself, you actually take it to the next level. Like, because then you're representing your own brand and your own reputation. And so, personally, I always feel if, I don't know where you work and if you're asking for a friend or not, but, right now is a really good time that if you feel like you're with a company that's not a match for your values and what you really want to be, now is the best time to find something else. And I think, again, like we have to all live our true, authentic selves. Otherwise, we're wasting a lot of potential because every single person has something to offer that can level up what we are as like a society, as a world, and as individual humans. So, yeah, I stand by my answer.
Yeah, I think for me it's about who are you protecting with your mask? Is it me or is it them, right? If the answer is constantly going to be I'm protecting me, you're end up going to be a lot unhappier. You would think it's the opposite, right? If I'm doing it to kind of just keep protecting them and they're fine and and as long as they're good, I'm good, right? Happy client, happy life, right? No. I mean, you can have, if it's constantly you having to make sure that you're covering your butt, I can tell you that's a person who leaves work unhappy all the time. So again, like, you have to think about who are you doing this for? Who are you pretending to be this person for? or who are you pretending to be professional for? And once you have that answer to that question, I think it becomes pretty obvious what you need to do to change that. So.
Yeah, I think that's true, but I have a little bit of a different spin. I'm not sure that this is the question you're asking, so I don't know if this is relevant. But so for me, in my heart of hearts, I feel like I'm part 10-year-old girl and part 65-year-old grandma. Like, that's just who I am. But I can't be that person professionally. Like, professionally, I need to be somebody else. I need to show up as a different person. And so I used to struggle with if you want to be your authentic self, okay, well, my authentic self is like a bubbly grandma. But that's not super effective as a leader. So I think people have different versions of themselves. And so if you feel like, and they can be authentic versions of you. I mean, you may have your home version, but that doesn't have to be your only version of you. You can have your in-laws version, or your version of like who you are with your professionally. That might say something about me too. But is that at the heart of your conflict, or is that not? Like, I'm not sure. Where's the conflict? What's the origin of it? Oh, okay. I see. It's fodder for conversation. Okay. Yeah.
Well, I think it is a bigger. I think what you're saying though is a bigger conflict, right? Like, so there's a lot of companies that expect you to be an expert in something, and quite frankly, when somebody introduces me as an expert, I feel embarrassed. Like, I learn from everyone around me, and I only try to give back and share. And I think that when you are like beating your chest and you're like have this ego-driven brand, what that really is working from a place of scarcity instead of a place of abundance. And if you work from a place of abundance, I mean, it's the best mindset to attract more people that are like, wow, I want to be with you. I think it goes full circle to what you started with, is the difference between manipulation and really evangelical sort of leadership, where you can inspire somebody to follow you in your work.
Well, and also I just want to be, because you had mentioned a lot of people in the room are probably in client services, me too, at least that's been a lot of my past anyway. The mask might not have been or be of my own choosing. And something you just said kind of triggered that for me. It's like I walked out on stage, someone else cast me as something I shouldn't be. They handed me the mask that I need to wear, and now I have to deal with what that means.
That sucks.
Yeah, but I'm gonna back your play. I still think I'm gonna take your advice in that situation even, and double down and say, well, now or never. I'm gonna have that conversation to say, I got cast this way. Do you see it that way? This is the mask I'm wearing. I might not use these metaphors because they probably don't apply to most people to help them, resonate with the idea. But really find out, well, what are we really here to do? Because if you want me to be the unassailable, infallible expert, I'm here to tell you I ain't. And if you want your money back now, let's just cut bait and get done with this.
Right, and I really don't want to dominate this, but this is like actually my soapbox. This is like where I could like start the show, because I run an organization called Hack the Gap, and I have been working before Hack the Gap on Twin Cities Geekettes and on all kinds of women in tech and bringing more people into the fold. And when you cast yourself as an expert, people around you actually are afraid to jump into that double dutch. Like, it's hard to be the person who doesn't know something. And I will tell you, after running Hack the Gap for almost 5 years, that women tell me all the time that when they come to the event and they have an experiential experience with a group of other women, they showed up thinking they were the only person who wasn't an expert, and they were maybe in the wrong career, and it had to do with being the only woman often on a team, and the way online language works, where you say like, oh, this is really easy, and it's like, well, it's not easy for me. Why? Like, what is wrong with me? And it goes back to user experiences about how you feel about yourself when you're interacting with something. And so these women come together and they actually find like, wow, I am not alone. Like, this is a place where other people are having a hard time getting in. And so like putting up the mask, or having somebody cast you as an expert, or putting you on a pedestal, going back to what you were saying earlier, it's like, that doesn't do anyone any good. Like, especially when it comes to community or raising up people or getting other voices involved, it just doesn't do any good.
Yeah, and if it's a scary conversation with a client, you can still reframe and cast it in client value.
Yeah.
I mean, I am not providing my level best value to you for your dollar, for your time, by wearing this mask that I was cast with that isn't appropriate. And if that still doesn't cut the mustard, then yeah. I mean,
So another diplomatic way to say it is like, let's say somebody casts you as an SEO expert. You could say, you know what, I know a lot about SEO, I've been doing all these projects, but guess what? Did you know that SEO grows all the time? Did you know web development changes all the time? Did you know there's always new web languages? Did you know that there's always a new algorithm for Google? It's like, then you can start to shift it in your own way without coming out calling them a liar or saying you're not an expert. You can say, I'm an expert, but you know just as well as me, like, you might be a building inspector and like the codes are always changing, there's new materials, there's different types of builders. Like, you can talk about it in a way that makes everybody win in the end. It's like, yeah, we're experts up until when we're not, because it's always changing.
Yes. Hi, Josh.
Well, I was wondering, what do you do about keeping yourself engaged when you're vulnerable as a leader and you get betrayed?
The question was, what do you do when you're a leader and you're being vulnerable and then you're betrayed?
betrayed.
Do you mind saying more
How do you
about
stay
that?
engaged?
What does that mean, betrayed?
When you have an understanding about what you feel about the expectations and you don't follow through, some of that. How do you keep yourself engaged when you have the expectations and believe in what they're saying and it doesn't follow through, or they just completely blindside you?
And they being your peers or your staff or your leadership team?
Not relevant, but if you want to tailor it, go ahead.
Just to assume everybody's going to disappoint you. No, I'm kidding. No,
I
don't
mean,
do
yeah,
that.
it's about resilience. Like, you should expect that those things are going to happen. Like, everybody you're working with is human, and humans are unpredictable in a lot of ways. So you should expect that there are going to be people who drop landmines and people who let you down and people who betray you. Those are all really normal things. I would take Kristen's earlier advice. If you find that that's part of the culture, then you need to get out. That's not a culture that's a sustainable culture. It's not going to lead to a healthy situation for you or growth for you. Or the trade-offs that you make to grow in a situation like that aren't really very effective.
Yeah.
But I will say, I mean, just those are moments of those are teachable moments. So when those things happen, I mean, again, it's about being objective, and if you can find a way to detach yourself from, it's very difficult, but if you can emotionally detach from what just happened and look at it sort of as an outsider, like look at it as a friend. How would a friend look at this? What would they evaluate? And don't tell yourself these caricature stories about the people who are involved. Like, oh, that guy was so terrible. Oh, he's so dishonest. He probably doesn't think he's dishonest. He probably thought he was doing the right thing. And so I think it's very difficult, but there's always a huge lesson in those moments. And if you survive those moments, you prove your resilience to yourself and to the people around you, and you learn. So, I mean, I know it's horrible in the moment, but those are gifts. They're horrible gifts. They're like, pull back your sheets and there was a horse head and that kind of gift, but you will learn from those.
Yeah, and honestly, there's a scale of interest to this, too. I mean, it could be a fairly mundane sort of betrayal. I mean, mundane and betrayal doesn't sound like they fit together, but I think that the resilience serves you very well. I mean, if it's something that completely unseats you, is that actually a pattern, or is that, the outcome of some odd circumstance or whatever? If it's a pattern, leaders aren't chumps. That diffuses respect and kind of undermines any kind of reliability and credibility. Being a chump sucks. It really does. It leads to shame and a lot of other things. Not that I'm talking from having ever felt that way, but kind of am. So I think part of it too is just understanding, I mean, what kind of scale of interest are we talking about here too? An entire organization failed you miserably. Well, that's a very different thing than someone on your team didn't get their shit done. And I think the way that I would handle those two things are radically different based on what that scale of impact and interest is.
I always think about an ocean. Like, if a wave comes and gets you, and knocks you down and salt water goes in your nose and your throat, like, you get back up. You just stand back up and you go for it again. And like the resilience thing is huge. There's nothing really worse than betrayal. I mean, that's hurt. I mean, it's like deep hurt, but like literally if you can visualize an ocean and just think like, I would just stand back up, because you're not going to let the ocean overcome you, right? Like, that is my best metaphor when I'm feeling down. I'm like, gotta get back up, gotta go back out there. This is a gift, this is a lesson, and down the road it might be putting me on a different path that I'm meant to be in. Be thankful for it later.
This is super cheesy.
Oh, really fast. So thank you. And one of the things is that we've all been saying here that relationships, building relationships, deepening relationships matters as a leader. One of the hardest things that I've come to experience is that, man, at times as a leader, I need other people to help me. It's super hard for me to say I need help. That goes back, Kurt, to what I meant about vulnerability earlier. That was one of the hardest kinds of vulnerability for me to expose, to say, you know what? I got caught flat-footed and I need help to pick myself back up, get the salt out of my nose, try again. Because sometimes it's just, it's hard for me to do that alone, and I need the help of peers and people that I've built those relationships with. You were going to say.
I just, whenever I have any sort of difficult situation, I always ask myself, what is this here to teach me? And it's really, it is really turning something difficult into a gift. But I think when you ask yourself, what is this here to teach me, it allows you to be more objective and to sort of stop and, again, stand in the other person's shoes or the people's shoes around you and understand, why did they do this thing that they did? Is it because they're mean-spirited people? No. Is it because they're incompetent? No. There is a reason. What are those reasons? Let me understand what they are. And then, being present with your discomfort, which is very, very difficult. But I mean, that actually gives you power over it. So this is like going down the Zen route, the Buddhist route. But what is this here to teach me?
Okay, I think we're going to wrap it up. So first, I want to thank everybody for coming, and I appreciate you taking the time on a Monday to come and listen to us. I think, again, if there's one thing that I started this show about, was to learn a lot more, just learn a lot more about what it meant to be a leader, what it meant to be a better husband, a better father. And like I mentioned, a lot of it came down to just being good at influencing and understanding other folks and spending time being present and all the different things that everybody talked about here. I want to thank Sarita, Brian, and Kristen for joining me today. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you so much.